This very well may be the ultimate flesh tone color palette, the Zorn Limited palette, as we've talked about before in previous episodes. In this episode, we're going to discover even more amazing properties of these color mixtures, and I'd like to welcome you to the Zorn palette Unlimited. And here's an image of our model Christine, and I'm going to keep a picture of her to the top left corner of your screen. And if you'd like to have access to this photo reference, I will have a link to my Facebook photo reference group in the description box down below. So as mentioned, we are using the Zorn Limited palette, which we are going to now refer to as Unlimited for this week's episode. And I'm working on a 12-inch by 12-inch cotton canvas. It was an old painting. I kind of ran out of canvases one day, so I just took a bunch of paint, scraped it off my palette, combined it. It turned into some kind of brown, and then with my palette knife, painted over an old painting. So that's what you're seeing there. That was on my canvas previously. So I'm starting off with the very simple umber sketch. Even though we're not using umber, we mixed the red and the black to create a drawing color. So even though it's not burnt umber, it's still pretty similar, pretty close. So just the red and the ivory black. I'm looking for the bottommost portion of the chin. And I will mention this is the first Zorn palette video that will have multiple days. So I will work on this painting multiple days, whereas the previous ones were all alla prima. But we're going to start this one as if it was an alla prima. And initially, I wanted this painting to dry overnight with each pass, which of course was kind of an impossible task, but I tried anyway. I put the Neo McGilt medium into the paint. Again, all of the materials will be listed in the description box down below. So I pre-mixed a little bit of medium with my palette knife on each of these colors, hoping that if I painted really, really thin, so I'm thinning out the paint with odorless mineral spirits, hoping that if I painted really thin, it would dry overnight. And no, this didn't dry overnight. The cadmium red is a slow dryer, and the ivory black is a slow dryer. The yellow ochre is a fairly slow dryer, and I'm using titanium white instead of the flake white this time. Again, just running low on materials. But the titanium white actually worked pretty much perfectly, to be honest. Traditionally, the Zorn palette is supposed to be with flake white or lead white, but titanium white worked just fine for this week's painting demonstration. So now you're seeing I'm drawing in the eye sockets. So I look for the outside shape first, usually, and then I'll start to place in where I want the eye sockets to fit. Now I'm working my way up towards the main triangle. And remember, the main triangle is just the two eyes and the nose, just trying to figure out where the two eyes and the nose fit. And with this linear drawing, I'm trying to obtain at least about an 80% accuracy, which really isn't much with portraiture. And then I'll be getting right into flesh tones. So just a very simple little indication there for the eyes. And this is important with the Zorn palette because the drawing color that you use, you don't want it to be too bright. So I'm not really trying to make the drawing color too bright red, just because this drawing color won't dry. It's going to stay wet when I paint over it. So whatever I do, I don't want the drawing color to have too much influence over the colors that I will be painting over top of them. So now you're seeing a very simple indication there for the bottom of the nose. So again, there's the main triangle, the two eyes and the nose. And now, based on the corner of the nose, I'm going to start to put in the mouth. And the mouth is going to be kind of not the easiest, but one of the more simple features to move in case I get it wrong in the future. But I wouldn't want to say, I wouldn't want to move one of the eyes per se. And now with the drawing color, we just filled in a little bit of a tone for the hair, not too much. So here we are mixing up the flesh tones, so the titanium white and the yellow ochre for our first little light. And now we're using the cadmium red ivory black, so the drawing color mixed with the yellow ochre and the cadmium red. So I'm going to refer to the black, yellow, red, all of those together as Zorn brown. So the combination of all the colors together minus the titanium white will be Zorn brown. And Zorn orange is going to be yellow ochre with a tiny bit of cadmium red. So Zorn orange is now going to be a term that I'm going to use. Zorn brown is going to be a term that I'm going to use. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very, very excellent portrait palette. And in this week's episode, I discovered some things about this palette and how to use it that was really, really shocking to me in a positive way. So as you're seeing there, I mixed up the color value web, which we're going to refer to as the Zorn color value web. And it's going to be very important with a limited palette to have your mixing space to be organized. Now, you don't have to organize it in the way that I organized mine, but I organized mine based on value. It's a little bit lighter on the top, and then it gets darker as it goes lower on the palette. But later on, I will actually have warmer tones, such as the pinker tones, to the right of that color value web, cooler tones, kind of more greenish tones, to the left of the palette. And overnight, when I finish each day's work on this painting, I actually put that palette in the freezer just to try to preserve the colors a little bit. Now, getting back to the painting, I'm just looking for some of the more basic planes around the eyes, in particular the eye sockets. So just like I did with the preliminary drawing, I'm looking for the main triangle, and I'm working in the order of importance, basically. The eyes are just much more difficult to move than the nose. The nose is more difficult to move than the mouth. So I'm prioritizing the more difficult areas and trying to nail them down, essentially. As you're seeing, the topmost region of the upper eyelid to the left of your screen and the top plane right above the eye socket, this plane that you're seeing me paint right in here, they're the light most facing planes. And remember, if you're new to this channel, a plane just means a three-dimensional concept of a flat surface in space. And each one of those flat surfaces has a specific angle in relation to the light source, which will determine the brightness of that given plane. Now I will give some momentary pause, or I will slow down my narration so that there's some variation in how I narrate this episode. And as I said, I would slow down the narration. Doesn't mean I won't narrate. I will explain some things in this momentary uh, pause in the narration. So I'm actually using synthetic brushes all throughout the painting instead of bristle brushes, simply because I didn't want to cake on the paint. Again, this was the first day that I was working on this painting. So while I was painting, I thought that if I painted more thin, that somehow the paint would dry, but it didn't. The reason why I'm using the synthetics is just because I'm painting a little bit at a time instead of, the more thick applications of paint that you would get from a bristle brush. Now you pretty much have all of the essential colors that you need for flesh tones at your disposal with the Zorn palette. But one of the major things that will help with working with such a limited palette that is just the four colors, like I mentioned earlier, is to organize the mixing space. So that's why I like to use the color value web, which we'll refer to for this episode as the Zorn color value web. As you're seeing how I'm optimizing by taking the colors right from the color value web, and in instances such as this one right here, um, when I want to mix a drastic color change, I'll mix to the side of the Zorn color value web. So just mixing the titanium white with some of the other paint that was on the palette. So that was black and white with some flesh tone, which I usually refer to as the color for the sclera. And the sclera is the white of the eye. And remember that the white of the eye is not white. It's usually some type of halftone. Although on the first day I kind of messed it up. I made it a little bit too white. I don't think I corrected this until the third day. And now I'm going to return to the normal narration speed. So like I said, I'm going to give little momentary changes in the rate of words that I'm speaking essentially for my narration. So at this point now you're seeing that the basic planes are starting to develop around the eyes. And more recently, I've had a lot of questions on the quote unquote realistic. So as you've noticed, I'm painting more realistic with these episodes. And like I said, I'm uploading these videos typically once a week, trying to do the best that I can with that. It just really is a matter of how much time you spend on a painting, given your knowledge on the structure of the face, the anatomical landmarks of the face, and if you have some experience doing still life or cast drawing, and of course working from life, all of that combined together and a lot of time is what is helping me create more realistic images. So a little bit of the ivory black right into this mixture, the Zorn brown mixture that we had there. I should also mention Zorn green. So Zorn green is going to be yellow ochre with a tiny bit of ivory black. And then Zorn blue is going to be ivory black with a tiny bit of the titanium white. And then Zorn pink is going to be cadmium red with a tiny bit of uh, the white, the titanium white. And this should go to show that you can use titanium white instead of lead white for the Zorn palette. I didn't really do it by choice. I was running low on my lead white. But for those of you that don't want to use lead white but still want to, use the Zorn limited palette, or as we're referring to this week, unlimited palette, this should stand in as an example for what you can do with the titanium white instead of the flake white. And remember, all of the brands are listed for you in the description box down below. Now we're mixing in a darker value, a little bit of the Zorn brown with the ivory black and the cadmium red. We're going to put some of the dark on the corner of the side of the eye socket here. So now we're going to do the same thing to the other side with the darker color. And again, that's Zorn brown and ivory black. More ivory black than Zorn brown. Now you're seeing a nice little close-up shot here with the Zorn brown and a little bit of the ivory black. And when you layer, remember it's kind of important to layer lightly, like layer with the colors a little bit lighter than you eventually want to go with the flesh tones, just because it's easier to layer darker than it is to layer lighter. But with the Zorn palette, if you're going to be working consecutive days like I did with this demonstration, then you may want to go for the true value instead, because there is a chance that the colors will not dry by the next day, which can actually be an advantage. It was an advantage for me with this demonstration, though at this time, as I was painting, I didn't know it. And I'll explain why that was useful later on in the episode. Now we're putting in some of the planes for the nose. As I mentioned earlier, we're working with the main triangle. So now we're going to start to prioritize some of the shapes on the nose. And with flesh tones, you really want to consider the hue variation and the temperature variation. So I'm just going to use temperature variation first and say that the nose, in general, the bulb of the nose is a little bit warmer than the eyes, the flesh tones surrounding the eyes. And the bottom plane of the nose is a little bit darker as it is turning away from the light. And of course, the highlight is the brightest area, as we already indicated in there. So now we're mixing a little bit of the ivory black and the cadmium red. And I will say, in this painting demonstration, at some point I discovered a Zorn violet. So you can have a Zorn violet if you do a Zorn blue, which is ivory black with a tiny bit of the titanium white, and then add a little bit of the Zorn pink, which is the cadmium red and the titanium white. You actually can obtain a very nice violet color. I would have never pictured that in my earlier painting demonstrations. Again, there's a lot more that you can discover when you're working on a painting for multiple days as opposed to just working on it for one day. Now, as you're seeing to the left, I actually put in a darker puddle of color. Uh, if you're looking at the bottom of the color value web, just above, there's a very warm dark. So now you're seeing how I'm starting to organize different hue variations on the color value web. And it'll be important to take and pick and choose from those colors, as you just saw me do there. When I want to push an area warmer or push an area cooler, and still have some kind of idea of the relative value range. Now we're starting to put in some of the light most facing planes on the side of the nose. And again, we're using titanium white with the yellow ochre and a little bit of Zorn orange. And the Zorn orange was already existing on the color value web. Remember, Zorn orange is yellow ochre with a tiny bit of cadmium red. I should explain some things right now as it may relate to the future of this episode. There is a high probability that this episode was uploaded a week late. That is because it's the holiday season over here where I am. A long story short, which made voiceovers nearly impossible. So if this video did manage to upload on time, that means I somehow my efforts through waking up extremely early um, on the same day the video was supposed to be uploaded succeeded in creating and finishing this video. So just an explanation: if this video ended up being uploaded late, then you'll know why. I'm only human. There's only so much I can do. And now we're changing the hue a little bit. So that is, we're maintaining the value range on the side of the nose, but we just made it a little bit more pink towards the right side of your screen and more towards the yellow ochreish towards the other side. So towards the right of the screen, the right of the nose, facing us, the nose is a little bit more pinkish, and then towards the left, it's a little bit more yellowish. And then as we work our way across the side planes, I'm actually going to let the paint be even thinner and a little bit thicker, though I'm not painting that thick uh, in the light most facing areas. Now I'm mixing up Zorn pink. So tiniest bit of the titanium white and a pretty fair amount of the um, cadmium red. Now I use some of the Zorn brown to bring down the heat of the Zorn pink. And that's going to be useful for painting the colors of the lips. Now Zorn brown and a little bit of cadmium red. And remember, as I mentioned before, these paints, I pre-mixed a little bit of my medium into them, a fast-drying medium, Neo McGill medium. Again, link in the description to get these colors to dry. But what that also did was it thinned out some of these more opaque colors. Now, for better or for worse, uh, thinning out the opaque colors a little bit actually helped me achieve a nice and almost alizarin crimson feeling uh, dark red when I mixed the cadmium red with the Zorn brown. So on the corner of the mouth, that's usually an area where I would use alizarin crimson or alizarin permanent, just because it's a nice red to tint some dark color to make it reddish. But instead, with the more thinned out cadmium red and Zorn brown, I achieved almost the same exact effect. Just to show you again what you can do with this palette and what you can discover with this palette when you work on a painting for more than one day. And now we're working on the lightmost facing planes for the philtrum and the side of the mouth. And I'm still keeping everything rather loose, rather workable. So remember, one thing I always say is keep your shape simple and easy so that when the time comes to make changes, those changes are simple and easy to manage. That's especially true when you're going to be working on a painting multiple layers. And I believe this is the first painting that I did in this series of more realistic paintings that I started in the alla prima fashion. Now we have the lightmost facing plane on the chin. I will have to apologize for the quality of the photo reference. The photo reference is a little bit distorted. So the face, if you, when you download this picture, if you're on the Facebook photo reference group, I'll probably leave a note when I upload this picture. It is a little distorted. So it did distort the image. I fish-eyed the model's face, so it overdid the perspective. As you've seen, the model is tilting forward. Um, it kind of overdid that, and it did blast the lights on the face. So in the midtones, I'm being especially cautious to bring out the lightmost facing planes. And not just make it kind of flat the way the photograph is making it look. Though I will admit, I never did achieve the tilting of the model's head as the model's head is raised. I never did achieve that effect as as accurately as I could have. So again, I'm only human. Now I'm painting in the side of the cheek, the zygomatic bone, cheekbone, and I'm being very cautious with the um, the plane change itself. I'm trying to make sure that the value again is turning much more quickly. So remember, the side plane of the cheekbone is a much faster curve. So the values are going to change much more rapidly. And remember, excuse me, remember a fast curve is just a curve that's turning more rapidly. A slow curve is a curve that's closer to being just a flat surface. You can think of an area such as the sphere where the curvature is even throughout for comparison. And as the halftones turn towards the side, I don't know where I heard this from, but I heard that the local color of the model, um, the more true color of the model's flesh tone, usually shows in the halftones, and in particular the halftones that are approaching the shadow, not necessarily the dark light, I don't think, but the halftones that are turning more away from the light. So that's why you're seeing a little more of the influence of the yellow ochre and the Zorn orange, as this model's flesh tones are kind of a little closer to the orangey, the yellow orangey. And with the cheekbones, I'm actually putting in the Zorn pink. There you're seeing me put in the Zorn pink along the side of the cheekbones. And the reason being is that I believe that if I was to be working from life, that would have been visible on this model, but the photo reference just blasts it out. There's usually more blood flow around this area of the face, I believe. So it should be getting a little more pink. And that's why we're throwing in the Zorn pink. And now we're just going to cover the surface all throughout the side plane of the cheekbone all the way down towards the chin. And again, this was the first day, and I thought that this by some chance would dry overnight, so that's why I was painting a little bit lighter. And remember, when you're working on your first layer, if you're going to work on a painting for multiple days, you also want your edge quality to be rather soft. That's why the edges are kind of soft everywhere, minus around the eyes. See how I'm making that a little bit softer? And that's a little bit of the Zorn brown with the yellow ochre. And there you have it. That is the first day's efforts on this painting. And here we are back on the second day. So I ended up taking the palette out of the freezer, and I let the palette sit for a little while to kind of thaw out. So we're using, again, the combination mentioned earlier for the Zorn orange. So the nice thing about the Zorn colors is that you can adjust the brightness or the characteristic of the color that you're mixing. So my Zorn orange is going to lean towards the scarlet, lean towards the kind of orangey red. And now we're going to go ahead and mix Zorn brown. So yellow ochre, ivory black. Oh, excuse me. That's Zorn green. Sorry. That's Zorn green. So that's a tiny bit of ivory black with more yellow ochre. And we're actually going to use Zorn green for some of the green fabric of the drapery the model's wearing later on, which will be kind of cool. So now the ivory black, yellow ochre, cadmium red. So you tell me, what color did I just mix? So if you thought Zorn brown, then you're correct. I just mixed Zorn brown. And again, with the Zorn palette, you can kind of adjust the way or the characteristic of each one of these colors. If I wanted Zorn brown to lean towards the sienna, burnt sienna, then I would have had more of the Zorn orange. If I wanted to make it lean more towards the burnt umber, I would have had more yellow ochre mixed into it. And there I was inspecting if the color had dried, and nope, it didn't dry. It hardly dried. I will admit it did get tacky in some areas, but no, not touch dry anywhere. And at this point in the filming, I was a little nervous. I didn't know if I had just ruined it or if it was, or should I just go with the painting. And I decided to just go for it. So there's a lot of fear in this moment in the painting, but I decided, oh well, I'll just go with it. So I'm using a little bit of the Zorn pink and the Zorn red orange. So the Zorn red orangish color, which we'll just call Zorn orange. So Zorn orange and Zorn pink. As I mentioned before, I'm now utilizing the color value web extensively. So as you're seeing that it's pretty organized, not just in value, but in color. So the top right area is a little bit more um, white and orangey-ish. As it moves higher up, it's just white and yellowish. As it moves further down, it's more pinkish. And as it goes even further down, it's darker and it's more pinkish and more orangey. And each day that I worked on this painting is approximately 4 days studio work. I usually will work around 10 hours a day. So with the filming, it's about 4 days, 4 days really, 4 hours. As you can tell, I'm kind of tired. It's about 4 hours of painting time with each day. And now this is 4 days that I worked on this painting. So yeah, you can do the math. And then on top of that, I have a bunch of other studio paintings that I'm working on. So I usually will work on about 3 paintings a day, sometimes more. Now we're mixing in the Zorn green into the darker middle tone region of the palette. And now we're starting to put in the little halftone on the side of the eye socket. So you can achieve a lot of hue variation with these Zorn colors. So as you saw, I was putting in a little bit of a cooler tone for the side of the turning plane for the side of the eye socket, and a little bit lighter there with the titanium white, and the more orangey region on the color value web. At this point, I was just experimenting with how bright I can make the colors, or how light, excuse me. And now I took a little bit of that kind of color, that muted pink that I used for the lips. So I kind of have two different oranges. I have a more like pinkish orange that I used for the lips, and then just a more reddish orange on the palette. And I'm going back and forth between these colors. So a little bit of the Zorn orange into the already orangey region of the palette, and we're just pushing a little bit more warmth onto the top plane of the nose. Again, working little by little, painting very thin. Unfortunately, however, you can't really see the color variations too well on the computer screen. It might be better on your screen, but on my screen, I don't really see too much of the color variations, which is kind of a shame. Now, as you're seeing on the palette, I've added a little bit more of a bright pink. So I did mix a Zorn pink uh, with the palette knife. So that was, as I mentioned before, the red and the white. And now with just Zorn blue, leaning more towards the ivory black, I painted in the background. So it's pretty wild what you can get with this 4-color palette. As I mentioned in my however many other Zorn videos I've made, this should be the one that really shows you the true extent of the Zorn palette, or maybe takes you even further than the other ones. So now we're mixing up Zorn brown, but leaning towards the ivory black for the dark shapes of the hair. And I'm working with the darkmost accents first. And even though I painted with the drawing color rather thin, it was not dry, not even touch dry on the second day. And I actually believe this might be the third day. At some point, I did kind of lose track of time, but this is most likely the third day at this point. And after doing a quick little check, this is the third day. So when I was working in the middle tones of the face, a day had actually passed. So now I'm mixing up the Zorn green, but I'm leaning more towards the yellow. So I have a lighter version of the Zorn green, and even the Zorn green can have different characteristics, but I chose to go with the brightest Zorn green that I possibly could. And there we have painted in the clothing with the Zorn green and the background with the Zorn blue. And of course the hair with the Zorn brown. And now, just like we did with the face, we're putting in some of the subtle halftones for the side of the neck. And that is the third day's efforts. Again, I'm sorry I kind of missed the transition from the second day to the third, but that's the end of the third day's efforts. And now the fourth and final day that I work on this painting. I'm using a selfie stick, that metal thing that you're seeing me use to lean on, just so I don't uh, smear the paint off the background of the painting. And now in the fourth day, the changes are going to be basically imperceptible, and mostly imperceptible to the camera. So I will only show a little bit of footage, but I'll explain to you what I did on the fourth day. So on the fourth day, I corrected the white of the eye, the sclera. I made it less white and closer to the true neutral. And as you're seeing here in the close-up, I take each one of the forms, each one of the features, that is, and start to add more depth, meaning I'm pushing the subtlety within the planes and pushing the darks darker, the lights a little bit lighter, little by little, in slight increments with this tiny brush. And this did take, again, approximately 4 hours. Again, it's part of my studio. It's part of my working day to create this. Although I won't show everything because, again, it wouldn't make sense to have 16 hours in a painting video. And with a little bit of the Zorn brown leaning towards the orangey, the yellow orangey, now we're starting to put the lights for the hair. I'm painting rather thin, and I used a little bit more of the Neo McGilp. And the brush that I'm using is a fairly worn out synthetic brush, but it's worn out in the way that the brush stroke actually resembles hair, which is pretty nice. And there you have it. That's the conclusion of the fourth day's efforts on this painting. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you so much for watching this week's episode. Again, I really hope that it helps you out and shows you some more insights into the Zorn palette, as we have referred to it as the Zorn Unlimited palette. And remember, if you would like to have access to this photo reference, I will have a link to the Facebook photo reference group in the description box down below. If you would like to support this channel even more, I have a Patreon account. And it's now time for our new patron shout out. So thank you so much, Henry Crossfield. Your support truly means the world to me. I am so grateful for your support. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next episode.